Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to my live stream. I'm Rashid Abu Sam, your host in Houston, Texas. Today, I'm launching my new book, Exile of the Heart. It just came out on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble, so order your copies now. It's available in paperback, hardback, and in ebook formats. Please let me know if you're hearing me. We're going to be able to have some live chat during this launch party. Okay. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. To all of my viewers, I'm Rashid Abu Sam in Houston, Texas, and it's a chilly 14 degrees Celsius here, or 57 degrees Fahrenheit, as we're going into winter in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you for joining my live stream for the launch of my new book, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents, in which I write about my life growing up in Switzerland and in Brazil, and then studying in the US at Swarthmore College, and then moving to Saudi Arabia to work as a journalist at Arab News newspaper in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where I worked for nearly 20 years, first as a reporter, then as an editor, and I also wrote a weekly opinion column on the Philippine page called Manila Moods. I started in 1993 and wrote the column, I think, for roughly 17 years until 2009 or 10, I believe. So today I'm going to be reading some excerpts from my book. You can get involved. You can send me questions through the chat. Let me see. I'm putting it on screen now. All of these comments that you're seeing are mine. Let's see. Please join me. Please join me. Let me know if you're hearing me. Okay. I'm still waiting to see if you guys are hearing me. I hope so. Let's check if I have any messages. If you're unable to join me for this live stream, you can later watch it on YouTube. It should be stored there, and also on Facebook. So I'm live streaming to Facebook, YouTube, and X, which is formerly Twitter, all at the same time. Let me see if I'm showing up on Twitter. Oops, here's Twitter. We'll see now. Oh, yes, I'm live on Twitter. So please join me and listen. With a slight delay, I'm live on Twitter. Okay. Friends, are you seeing me? People come in. Hello, hello. You can buy my new book, Exile of the Heart, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's also available through the Kindle shop, on the Nook of Barnes and Noble, and on Kobo, if you prefer getting your books through Kobo. I'm trying to get my books available in the Philippines, in the fully booked bookstore chain. Hopefully I will hear back from them soon, because I know lots of Filipino readers would love to read my book, Exile of the Heart. This is the back. This is a proof copy, so that's why it has this thing here saying not for resale. Okay, well, I'm going to start my reading now. Let's see. Whoops. Okay. The first excerpt I'm going to read is from chapter 3, The Red Earth of Brasilia. And this is about when me and my family, my dad, my mom, and my sister Jamila, we first arrived in Brasilia in 1975. I was 11 years old. My sister was 16. My mother was maybe in her late 30s. And my dad was in his 40s. Brasilia, 1975. As the Pan Am Boeing 707 descended into Brasilia on September 4th, 1975, we stared out the jet's windows at a surreal scene of red dirt and dust. My father had already started his new post as a Saudi cultural attaché in Brasilia. My mother stayed behind in Geneva with Jamila and I, packing up our Danish furniture and photo albums alone and storing everything. Unlike European ones, the Saudi government did not offer a cargo stipend for its diplomats. We were all relatively young. My dad was 49, my mom was 39, and I was 11, and my sister was 16. Brasilia felt completely alien to us, new, isolated, and unfamiliar. Designed by famous Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer and urban planner Lucio Costa, the old dream of moving Brazil's capital away from the Atlantic coastline and into the middle of the country had finally been done by President Juscelino Kubitschek. He broke ground in 1956 and the city was inaugurated just 41 months later in April 1960. An ultra-modern city rose out of the Planalto Central, a plateau around 1,300 meters above sea level. Workers were brought in from the Brazilian Northeast to build the city, and all the construction materials, such as steel and concrete, had to be flown or trucked in. You either loved Brasilia or you hated it. Brazilians love to complain that the capital lacks the vibrancy of São Paulo and the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. When we arrived, we all hated Brasilia. There was red dust everywhere, and the city had hardly any trees. Accustomed to the old world charm of Geneva and Europe, the sheer frontierness of Brasilia was shocking. Little did we know that 40 years later, my mother and I would come to love it. So if you're just joining now, I'm reading excerpts from my new memoir, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents in which I talk about my life, my loves, my family, growing up in Switzerland and in Brazil, going to school in the US at Swarthmore College, and working in Saudi Arabia for nearly 20 years. And then I worked for 1 year in Abu Dhabi to help found the national newspaper after I was hired by Hassan Fatah, who used to be the New York Times correspondent in Dubai, and by Martin Newland, who was the British editor-in-chief of the newspaper. So next, I'm going to read to you about, let's see. Yes. When I arrived in Saudi Arabia in 1987, after studying at Swarthmore College, I majored in political science, and then I started working at Arab News, which was the first English language newspaper founded in Saudi Arabia in 1975. I started working in March 1988. And here I'm going to read you a bit from my chapter 10, entitled Censors and Cleavage, Life at Arab News. One of the first things I learned while editing stories was that Jerusalem cannot be referred to as only that. We had to insert occupied Jerusalem in datelines and stories that mentioned the ancient and disputed city. At first, I didn't understand why this was so important. But over the years, I came to appreciate just how politically charged every word in the Middle East could be. We didn't have government censors physically sitting in the newsroom, but the Ministry of Information closely watched everything we published. They were our invisible editors, ever present and always watching. Censorship at Arab News was legendary. Any wire story that criticized Saudi Arabia and/or the royal family was either not used or heavily edited. The most infamous act of censorship happened in the first 3 days of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait that started on August the 2nd, 1990. No Saudi media outlet was allowed to report what was happening right next door to us. The Saudi government froze in fear, not knowing how to react, but most people had access to satellite TV, and CNN was reporting the invasion. It certainly made the country look like it was an ostrich sticking its head into a hole in the vain hope that the harsh reality would simply disappear. So, for the first 3 days, no Saudi media outlet was allowed to report the invasion of Kuwait by the crazed Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq. So no news was in any Saudi newspaper. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't on Saudi TV, because the Saudi government was just too terrified. They didn't know what to do, you know? So finally, after 3 days, we were allowed to start reporting about it. And then we had lots of reporting on it. And near the end of the Gulf War, we sent a team led by Khalid al-Maina, our editor-in-chief, and I think Assam al-Khalib went. He was one of our Saudi reporters, and they actually went into Kuwait after it had been liberated by American troops, and they sent back very interesting stories for us. So here I'm reading excerpts from Exile of the Heart, my new memoir. I don't know if many of you know this, but my Saudi grandfather, my father's father, was a religious leader. He was an imam and an Islamic sheikh. He was born in Egypt, but he was eventually named the chief imam of the Holy Mosque in Mecca by King Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia in the early 1920s. And here I have a chapter about him called A Beautiful Voice from Egypt to Mecca. I remember your grandfather's voice. It was beautiful. We used to listen to him when we lived in Mecca, next to the Haram, said Faiza Amba's grandmother to me in Arabic when I visited the Amba home in Jeddah in the 1990s. You see, it's incredible. She still remembers your grandfather's voice, Faiza said to me, smiling broadly. Abdul Zahir Abu Samh was the name of my dad's father. He was born in Egypt in 1882 and died in 1951 in Paris on a stopover while traveling to the United States for treatment of kidney ailments. He was an imam and an Islamic scholar who in 1926 went to Mecca to perform Hajj. With him, he had a letter from Rashid Rida, a leader of the Salafi movement in Egypt, addressed to King Abdulaziz al Saud, saying he thought my grandfather would be a good candidate to be the Imam of the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. The king immediately hired him and named him chief Imam and Khatib at the Holy Mosque in Mecca. He also served as professor and supervisor of the faculty there. Writes Henri Lozier in his book, The Making of Salafism, Islamic Reform in the 20th Century. My grandfather's brother-in-law, Muhammad Abdul-Razzaq Hamza, who was the brother of my grandmother, Habiba Hamza, was also given a letter of recommendation by Rida and was later appointed the Imam and Khatib of the Prophet's Mosque in Medina by King Abdulaziz. My father would tell me and Jamila many stories about his father when we were growing up. He was a stern disciplinarian who believed that children should only be seen and not heard. If my dad and his brothers misbehaved as children, my grandfather would beat them. Despite this tough upbringing, I could tell that my father loved his father very much. In the few photographs of my grandfather that I have seen, he looks like a tall and remarkable man with piercing eyes and a white beard. It is a pity that he died before I was born. I would have liked to have known him. So if you're just tuning in now, my name is Rashid Abou-Elsam. I'm a journalist and a writer. I'm half American, half Saudi, and this is my first book that I've just written. Just came out today, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents. This is the back. Available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on Kobo, if you prefer reading it on Kobo. Let's see what's going on. Okay. I hope you guys are finding this enjoyable. The next excerpt that I'm going to read is, okay. In 1993, the editors at Arab News decided to revamp the whole newspaper's look in terms of graphics, but also in terms of how the newspaper was organized. And since Saudi Arabia has so many foreign workers from Egypt, from Pakistan, from India, from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from Africa, from the UK, from the US, we decided to set up specific country news pages for each significant group of expats in Saudi Arabia. So one of the pages that we set up was the Philippine page. And in 1993, the managing editor, Haider Kazem, who actually is retired from journalism and lives here in Houston now. I had lunch with him a few years ago. He called me over to his office and he asked me if I would be willing to write a weekly opinion column on the Philippines. I said yes, and we sat there for a few minutes thinking of names, and I think I came up with the name Manila Moods. And so I started writing this weekly opinion column that appeared on the Philippine page from 1993 until, I want to say, 2007 or 2008, so for a long time. So this is from chapter 18 in my book, and it's called Manila Moods. In 1993, Arab News decided to dedicate whole news pages to specific regions of the world to aggregate news for our Filipino, Indian, Pakistani, and Western readers. In this column that I was asked to write, I wrote about Philippine politics, overseas Philippine workers, their plight in the Gulf, and about popular culture in general. There was no scarcity of stories of OFWs being abused by violent employers in Saudi, Kuwait, and the UAE. Domestic workers were especially vulnerable as they were mostly women and lived in their employers' homes. Many Gulf employers treated their maids as indentured servants, making them work extremely long hours, confiscating their passports, and not allowing them days off. A few of the male employers sexually abused the maids, which would bring violent reprisals against the maids from the wives of the abusers. A particularly gruesome case was a Kuwaiti couple who had employed a Filipino maid whom they beat regularly and, in a final act of barbarity, had killed her and chopped her body up. When the police raided their home, they found pieces of the maid in the couple's deep freezer. But Gulf employers were hardly the only ones who mistreated okay, sorry about that. But Gulf employers were hardly the only ones who mistreated Filipino workers. Some affluent Lebanese families who employed female Filipinos as maids and nannies fled their homes in the mountains during one of the regular flare-ups of fighting between the different sects in Lebanon, and left behind their maids in their homes, often locking them in, unwilling to take them along or send them back to the Philippines. Harrowing stories of abandoned workers soon surfaced, causing the Philippines to impose a ban on the export of workers to Lebanon. This was a frequent action that Manila used against countries that were especially bad in their treatment of OFWs. But the sheer economic push of poor Filipinos wanting to work abroad and send dollars home would soon overturn these bans. So for you who are just tuning in now to my live stream, this is my new book, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents. It just came out today. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. For those of you who don't like to buy from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, it should be available through independent bookstores soon. So just wait for that. Have some patience, please. The next chapter I'm going to read from is chapter 21. It's entitled Moonshine and 9/11. Alcohol has famously been banned in Saudi Arabia since 1952 or 1956, when a Saudi prince shot the British consul general in Jeddah at a party where there was drinking involved. Despite the fact that alcohol has been banned in the kingdom ever since the late 1950s, Saudi Arabia, funnily enough, is one of the major importers, supposedly, of Johnny Walker whiskey, both through embassies, because embassies are allowed to import alcohol, or they were allowed until recently. They changed the law and they set up a store in Riyadh to sell alcoholic beverages directly to foreign diplomats and to non-Muslim foreign diplomats. Because if you're a Muslim foreign diplomat, you are not allowed to use this store in Riyadh. And since there was no available alcohol in Saudi Arabia, legally speaking, many people ended up brewing their own alcohol at home, and it became called Siddiqui, which means my friend in Arabic. So funnily enough, there have been many alcoholics in Saudi Arabia, both foreigners and Saudis, even though the country is technically a dry country. Many people think that under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that alcohol will eventually be liberated, so to speak, in areas where foreign tourists will be visiting, such as they've built a series of luxury resorts on the Red Sea coast, and many tourism experts believe that the lack of alcohol does keep many foreign tourists away from Saudi Arabia, even though um, Saudi Arabia has opened up immensely to foreign tourists over the past 4 years. Most Westerners do not need a visa to visit Saudi Arabia as tourists. Many can even get a tourist visa upon arrival in Jeddah or in Riyadh at the airport itself. So it's really changed immensely. And now I've been seeing a slew of like influencers visiting Saudi Arabia regularly and posting, snazzy videos that they make on YouTube and other online platforms. So here's the reading from Moonshine and 9/11. Apart from my Filipino gay friends, I also had several Western gay and straight friends in Jeddah, with Saudi Arabia not being an extremely family-friendly country because of all the restrictions on women. Many gay men were hired to work there. Most of these friends were British and Irish. Hugh worked as an English language teacher at a Saudi college. Tony likewise, and Alan was an interior designer who decorated the palaces of Saudi princes and rich businessmen. All drank heavily, and their drink of choice, given that alcohol was banned in the country, was the locally distilled Siddiqui, a clear and potent drink. Siddiqui means my friend in Arabic. And that is how everyone referred to the local moonshine. It was secretly sold in 1.5-liter mineral water bottles. To find some, you needed to have a connection who knew a good source of the drink. Drinkers kept their Siddiqui suppliers a closely guarded secret, only telling their closest friends about them. Danjin, a Filipina woman who lived in the building next to mine, was one such connection. Ronald had introduced me to her years earlier at a party. Her husband distilled the spirit in their apartment, and she took care of sales. But the stream of people coming empty-handed to their apartment then leaving with bottles of Sid in shopping bags soon became much too obvious for the authorities to ignore. So one day when I was returning to my apartment, I saw police and religious police cars outside their building, and I knew their jig was up. I had just been over to their house a few days earlier and thanked my lucky stars that I had escaped being arrested. Danjin managed to escape arrest by hiding in a neighboring apartment, but her husband wasn't so lucky and was arrested and served a jail term before being deported back to the Philippines. Sid needed to be mixed with tonic water or fruit juices to be drunk. You could have a Sid and Coke or a Sid and 7-Up. This stuff was potent. Drinking too much, too quickly, invariably led to throwing up and a massive hangover the next day. Those wishing to have lighter alcoholic drinks were in luck, as many expats made homemade white and red wine. They would buy large quantities of grape juice at the supermarkets and with sugar and yeast ferment the juice and then bottle it. This was especially true in the housing compounds favored by Western expats. I had a Dutch friend, Martina, married to an American who regularly had me over for white wine spritzers as we sat around their pool. Another friend was Lee, an Australian journalist married to an American pilot of Saudi Arabian Airlines. They lived in the huge Saudia compound and had a tiki bar in their living room, which they used regularly during the parties that they threw. Lee worked as a radio announcer at Jeddah Radio, which was run by the Ministry of Information. She did a sort of Desert Island Discs program in which she interviewed interesting people and played music tracks chosen by the guests. Soon after I arrived in Saudi Arabia, I was invited as a guest, and I gave her my tape of Ricky Lee Jones's 1979 song, Chucky's in Love. It doesn't have anything iffy in it, she asked me, explaining that she had to run it by the station censors to check for any naughty or forbidden words in the lyrics. No, there isn't, I replied, and it passed as I knew it would. Lee had shoulder-length blonde hair worn a la Farrah Fawcett and had skin so tanned that she sometimes looked leathery. She was from Queensland, the Gold Coast, near the Great Barrier Reef, and loved the beach. She was quite athletic. Lee was our restaurant reviewer at Arab News, and I soon became in charge of editing her column and placing it in accompanying photos on the feature page. Gourmet Gossip was the cheeky name given to it. As the paper didn't have a budget to pay for the food she reviewed, Lee depended on the goodwill of restaurants to provide her with free meals in return for a write-up in the paper. I wasn't a fan of this setup as it clearly influenced her opinions, but she was very professional and never gushed in her column. I soon became a frequent guest at her review meals and loved the delicious and varied food that we ate. So if you're just tuning in, I'm Rashid Abu-Sam, a journalist and writer. My new memoir, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents, has just been launched today. It's available on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and on the Kobo app, if that's how you prefer to do it. It's available in the Kindle format, in the Nook format, and also in paperback and hardback. So please buy a copy today, because it was not cheap getting this book published. Next, I will read to you about the dangers of writing for foreign publications. So, working at Arab News, after maybe 10 years, I became sort of restless and started to write for foreign publications about Saudi Arabia, news stories. So I first started writing for Al Ahram Weekly in Cairo, Egypt, which is the English language publication of Al Ahram newspaper, which is one of the oldest newspapers in Egypt, which was started in the 1800s, I believe. And then I started writing for the Washington Times in Washington, D.C., which was and I think is still owned by the Moonies and is very right-wing and very conservative. I remember my friend Michael in Washington, D.C. was horrified when I started writing for them. But George W. Bush was the president at the time. 9/11 had already happened. The U.S. had invaded Iraq. So I thought, why not write for the people who are in charge now in the U.S., let them find out some interesting news about dissidents in Saudi Arabia, about gay Saudis being arrested for attending gay parties in Saudi Arabia and things like that. So here I'll read to you a little excerpt from chapter 25. Both Faiza and I, now Faiza is Faiza Amba, she was the first female journalist to join Arab News in the late 1980s, early 1990s. She then became the Saudi correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. And when she left that publication, she became the Washington Post's full-time correspondent in Saudi Arabia. And then after that, she sort of left journalism completely and went into filmmaking, and now she makes films. I've seen 2 of her films, I believe, the last time I was in Jeddah in 2023 at this cultural center run by the Jamil Group. Interestingly enough, there were cinemas in Saudi Arabia for a long time, and then they were banned after 1979 when the extremists took over the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca for 2 weeks, hiding in the tunnels underneath the mosque and who were only defeated after the Saudis brought in French special forces who flooded the tunnels allegedly with water and then electrified it, thus zapping many of these insurrectionists in the tunnel, these extremists. But after that, Saudi Arabia took a strong turn towards being much more conservative. We used to have Saudi women TV announcers reading the news in French and in English. They quickly disappeared. And cinemas by the early 1980s, I think the last one was closed down in Jeddah, like in 1981, or maybe even 1982. And they were banned until just recently, just a few years ago, when Mohammed bin Salman became our crown prince. He debanned or unbanned cinemas, and now we have many cinemas in Saudi Arabia. So here's the excerpt. Both Faiza and I face the danger of writing freely for American publications, where criticisms of Saudi Arabia were published without any censorship. Faiza was once stopped by passport officials at Jeddah's King Abdulaziz Airport when she was returning from abroad. They said that they had orders to keep her passport, which effectively meant she couldn't leave the kingdom. She soon found out that the authorities had not liked the headline of an article she had written for Newsweek about the 1996 Al-Khobar bombings of U.S. military personnel. She argued that it was her editors in New York that had put the headline on her story. She eventually got her passport back, but only after calling in favors from people who had connections with the government. Nothing so drastic ever happened to me, thank goodness. But I did write some articles that caught the attention of the authorities. One day, while having coffee with Faiza and a Saudi man who worked closely as an advisor to the government, I was startled when he casually asked me if someone in the government had gotten into contact with me about a recent story I had written that they did not like. I said no and left it at that. He was clearly trying to intimidate Faiza and I, but we just laughed it off in shocked annoyance, as he clearly had no power to censor us. I believe that Faiza and I were able to get away with writing critical stories about Saudi Arabia because we were writing in English and for foreign publications that were not widely circulated in the kingdom. The internet was still in its infancy, therefore very few people in the country had easy access to our stories. Nevertheless, we were acutely aware that the government was taking note of what we were writing, and we took the necessary precautions to write the stories we wanted, but without pissing off the authorities so much that they would want to arrest us or stop us from leaving the country. Having said that, I doubt that we could today write the same kind of stories that we did back then. Any criticism of the government online has landed many Saudis in prison under the rule of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. While the kingdom has opened up tremendously in the social arena, with women working, driving, and not being forced to cover their hair in public, the arena for dissent has shrunk dramatically. For all of you just tuning in, I'm reading excerpts from my new memoir, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents. I'm Rashid Abou Assam. I'm a journalist and a writer. My book is available now for purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. So let me take a little break to have some water. My throat is getting dry. Let's see. Nobody has sent me any questions. Okay. 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 So let me read you another excerpt. Okay, 1983 was a pivotal year for me because that was the year I finally arrived at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, 12 miles outside of Philadelphia. And that's where I met my good friend Michael North for the first time, and also my friend Anne Marie Odie, who is still a very good friend of mine. So here it goes. When I finally reached Swarthmore College in the fall of 1983, I felt elated at all the possibilities American freedom of expression had in store for me. My father took me to the campus to see me settle into my dorm room in Mertz, a rather bland dorm room built in the 1970s. Unlike American students who came by car from Pennsylvania or New York, I didn't bring furniture, mini fridges, or large pillows with me. I only had my suitcase, clothes, passport, and cash. Mertz had none of the charm of the much older buildings on campus, which were from the late 1800s and early 1900s. The campus was stunningly beautiful. Expansive manicured lawns stretched out, with many trees and flowers planted by the Scott Arboretum, part of the college. The main building, Parish Hall, was set on a hill above the train station and the village of Swarthmore. Like the White House in Washington, it had burned down and been rebuilt. Swamp white oaks lined McGill Walk from Parish to the train station. Redwoods and beech trees also populated the campus. We were only 12 miles outside Philadelphia, but seemed removed from the everyday world. At Swarthmore, we were in a bubble of exacting academics and the Quaker values of peace and always helping the oppressed. It was also one of the rare colleges in the late 1890s to have been founded as co-educational, a rarity at the time. Our nearby Quaker sister schools, Bryn Mawr and Haverford, were initially established as women's and men's colleges. They too would later become co-ed. My dad decamped rather quickly and left me to meet my roommate Andrew, who was from a Quaker family but liked to smoke weed. We got along well enough until he got a girlfriend called Sylvia, and they began having sex in his bed, with the lights out, with me in my bed. It was gross for me as a sexual neophyte. I soon applied to move to a single room, citing irreconcilable differences with Andrew. He eventually moved out, and I, much to my relief, had the room all to myself for the rest of the year. For entertainment, my new friend Michael and I soon found out that there was a mall near our campus. Springfield Mall was a brisk 20-minute walk from Swarthmore and had all the stores and ATMs that suburban malls had at the time. On October 30th, 1985, when we were sophomores, a mentally ill young woman named Sylvia Siegrist drove to the mall in her Datsun and took out a rifle and began shooting at people, first outside and then inside the mall. She was eventually overpowered and rendered by a graduate student, but not before killing 3 people and wounding 7 others. The news shocked us, and thankfully no one from Swarthmore was affected by the shootings. After a while, we returned to the mall, and I remember the huge dent left in the metal casing of the ATM machine that a bullet shot by Siegrist had hit. She had been aiming at a woman in the parking lot, but thankfully missed and instead hit the ATM. Siegrist received 3 consecutive life terms and is still alive today and in prison. When she was asked by a mall security guard why she had done the shootings, Siegrist replied, "My family makes me nervous." At the same mall during my first semester at Swarthmore, I got my first ear piercing. I had thought about it beforehand, sure that my dad would freak out if he saw me wearing an earring. At the time, there was an urban legend circulating that said men getting their right ear pierced meant that they were gay, and if you got your left ear pierced, that just meant that you were hip. But to my dad, that didn't matter. For him, only females got pierced. It was a strict no-no for men. It's laughable now, 41 years later, but at the time it was a monumental decision that I had to make. I felt very nervous, knowing that my pierced ear would be a shot across the bow of my dad's homophobic fears. In Muslim countries, baby girls often got their ears pierced as a statement to the world that they are female and not male. It was a practice that had deep roots in Islamic culture. When I finally convinced myself that I would get it done, I walked over to the mall and asked a young woman at a stall selling gold ear studs to please pierce my left ear. She quickly disinfected my earlobe with an alcohol pad and drew the spot with a marker where the hole would go. "Does that look okay?" she asked me, holding up a hand mirror for me to see the spot. "Yes, that's fine," I replied. I closed my eyes as the woman raised the ear-punching device to my earlobe. I felt a quick pinch, and then I had a gold stud in my earlobe. I felt a rush of euphoria. Finally, my earlobe is pierced, I thought to myself. The simple act of rebellion elated and scared me at the same time. The woman sent me back to campus with strict instructions not to remove the stud for several weeks, or else my hole would close. She also said I had to disinfect my earlobe with a cotton ball soaked in rubbing alcohol several times a day to avoid infection. Back on campus, most students didn't notice that I'd pierced my ear. "That's exactly the reaction I wish my family and relatives would have," I said. But just like Segrist, my family made me nervous. I got increasingly anxious as my Christmas break drew closer. I was flying home to Brasilia and would have to face my parents' reaction to my pierced ear. "Do you think I should just take it out for the holiday and put it back in when I return to Swarthmore?" I asked Michael. "Maybe, but just do what you want," was his reply. My stomach was in knots as I took the train to New York, where I would catch my flight back to Brazil from JFK Airport. My nerves gave me diarrhea. My fears were so big. And then I go on to explain my parents' terrible reaction to all of that when I arrived. So you have to buy my book to find out what happened. So this is the launch of my new book, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents. I'm Rashid Abu Al-Sam. I'm a journalist and an author, and my book is available to buy now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I hope you guys are enjoying my live stream so far. Let's see. Okay. Recently, there was a big comedy festival in Saudi Arabia held in Riyadh, sponsored by the Entertainment Authority, which is run by the Saudi government. And they invited a lot of Western comedians, especially from the American ones. And one of them was the lesbian American comedian Jessica Curson, and she went and took part of it. Many people in the US criticized the Americans comedians for going, saying that Saudi Arabia was an authoritarian country, and that they shouldn't have gone, remembering the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in Turkey. But when Jessica Curson came back to the US, she said she had gotten many messages from gay and lesbian people in Saudi Arabia who went to the festival and really enjoyed seeing her there and talk about gay and lesbian things openly. So I think the whole net impact of this comedy festival was very positive. for all Saudis in general. So I'm glad that they went, and I'm glad that Jessica Curson went. So for all of you who are just tuning in now, I'm Rashid Abou-Sam. This is the launch of my memoir, Exile of the Heart. A memoir across 3 continents. It's available on Amazon now. For my friends in Brazil, it is available on the Brazilian Amazon site, but only as an ebook. And it's only priced, I think, at R$24,99 para meus amigos no Brasil. Meu novo livro de memórias, Exile of the Heart, está disponível na loja da Amazon no Brasil, mas somente como livro eletrônico. My book is also available in the UK on the UK site of Amazon, and is available in the Netherlands and in Belgium on the BOL website, BOL. And hopefully I'll be getting my book into independent bookstores across America, in the UK, in Geneva, Switzerland, where I lived for nearly 10 years, and in the Philippines. I've sent a press release of my book to Fully Loaded bookstore chain. So hopefully my Filipino readers will be able to buy my physical book in the Philippines soon. So I hope you've all enjoyed my live stream. Again, if you're just tuning in, it's the launch of my new book, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents. It's available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on Kobo. And I think I'm winding up now. Let's see. Yes. Thank you very much for being here. And please buy my book. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.